Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Thank you for joining us for the second session. Uh, my name is Alistair Tibbett, and I'm your host for this session on social media. Uh, I'm speaking to you from a very cool house in the Northwest Highlands, far away from any of the heat wave. We actually have a yellow warning for thunderstorms at the moment, and I'm on a Starlink connection. So if I suddenly go dark, the chances are that my satellite dish has been taken out by a lightning strike. Hopefully that's not going to happen, and wherever you are, I hope that you are cool and comfortable. The session today is all about, essentially we titled it "In a Fragmented Social Media Landscape, What Still Works?" Um, Obviously, as you know, the demise of Twitter and the rise of TikTok, everything's changed even from 5 years ago. We have two of our members of the panel. We seem to have lost, unfortunately, Sarah Jean Ing from University of Cambridge. So we're hopeful she will join us um, during the panel. This is one of the joys of virtual panels. But we are delighted to have two other panel members. I'm going to introduce them just shortly. The Some of the topics which we agreed that we would speak about beforehand, just to give you a little flavor of what I'm going to ask people to touch on, are this idea of the splinter net. So how do we respond to an increasingly fragmented landscape? We also thought it'd be important to touch on brand safety and, of course, the ever-present specter of AI. Is it good or is it bad? How do you incorporate that in your work? What metrics can we, what are the metrics of success and failure, especially as it's getting increasingly hard to see young audiences. We know they're there, but it's getting harder to find them or know that they're there. And of course, the last part is almost trying to do more with less. How do we get the balance right between impact and reach? So that's what the kind of topics that we've asked people to our panel to touch on as we go through. A little bit of housekeeping again before I do the introductions. The meeting is being recorded, so please don't swear. Uh, as we may want to share the event after the recording after the event. It probably goes without saying these days that if you're not speaking, please stay muted for the sake of everybody else. There's a small chance, for example, that we have a young puppy and it might run around in the background barking, so I shall try to make sure that you do not get interrupted with that. Um, we want to give our speakers a chance to share what they have to say reasonably uninterrupted. So if you do have questions, please look for the Q&A tab underneath in the bottom bar of Zoom there, and add your questions in the Q&A tab rather than the chat. We will then have time to try, well, I hope we have time to try and answer some of those questions in a more structured way at the end. Um, Lastly, but not least, if we're planning to have a virtual unconference, which is a little bit ambitious perhaps, as the last session of the day. If there's any topic that you want to, if any of this chat hopefully sparks an idea that you would like to speak to other participants uh, with, please take the opportunity to go into the Canva whiteboard, which we will post a link to in the chat at some point, and add it as an idea. Please also have a look, take some time during the day to have a look at other people's ideas, and if there's any that you particularly think are good, please vote for them, and then we will hopefully be able to discuss them in a bit more detail at the end of the day. I think I've pretty much covered everything. So I should move on to introductions. I'm delighted that SJ is here. So we're a bit worried for a minute. So we
Sorry.
have Sarah Jane Ing from the University of Cambridge. We have Alistair Beach, who's Social Media and Digital Communications Manager from the University of Manchester. We have Francesco Drazio from who's the President and Chief Product Officer from social listening and audience intelligence tool Pulsar. And I'm also that you may see another UK admin account in the background. I'm very grateful to have Pat Okapi to help with the production as well. So without further ado, I think it'd be great if we could ask Francesco to speak first, just to give his a bit of overview on the topics that we've discussed. Take it away, Francesco.
Great. Thanks for having me today. So I'm Francesco, I'm the founder of Pulsar. I've been at this social media research, analytics, insights, intelligence kind of job for the last maybe like 17, 18 years. Pulsar is only a company that started in like at the end of 2012. But we've been through quite a few evolutions of the social media ecosystem. So one of the things that we've done in the last few months is starting mapping how the web on the social media side was evolving and how specifically the social media ecosystem was fragmenting. And so we've put together a couple of slides that we're going to use as context, and then we can have a discussion and follow ups on any specific item. But I think it's good to establish a bit of background on where we are. Um, if you're not familiar with Pulsar, Pulsar is an audience intelligence platform. So we build tools to make sense of data that comes out of these platforms. And so that's pretty much the job. And a few universities work with us. So we're familiar with the use cases and how this kind of data helps informing the job of academic institutions. Um, I'm going to share my screen now. And I think you can see my screen, right? Great. So I want to start from like sharing a couple of like establishing data points. So this is what the landscape looked like just in 2019. So obviously not even at the beginning of the social media space, but like halfway through where we already had a bunch of transformations. We already had a bunch of big platform rising and falling, like Facebook, for example, at the end of 2019, it was already um, an ex leader in the space, if you like, in terms of engagement. But that's what the landscape looked like. And what we've done with this analysis is trying to map the size of the different platforms. And we included various kind of different platforms, not just traditional social media platforms. For example, we included the messaging platforms. But the idea was to map the size of these platforms as bubbles and sizing the bubbles based on the active users on each. And so you can see what happens between 2019 and 2025 at the end of the year. This data was collected at the end of, I think it was at the end of November last year. And so you can really see what that explosion looks like. So you still have a few dominant platforms, but then you start to have a second and a third and a fourth tiers or platforms that are like of different sizes and different scales that are completely fragmenting the way people engage with their peers online. Nothing new, but I think it's good for you to see the gap, how much more fragmented the space is compared to what it was just like 6, 7 years ago. The other thing that we did was also mapping how the format of those social platforms was evolving. So the color of the bubbles represents the main type of medium that drives engagement on that platform. So you will have like a visual platform, text, hybrid, chatting, streaming, and then anything that is like specific to niche behaviors such as cooking, for example. And a couple of things that you can notice immediately: text is not dominant anymore. And all the platforms that are dominant involve elements of either hybrid or visual, primarily formats of communications, or they tend to have chat interfaces for messaging. And that's what effectively that's the split in terms of like where things are kind of like heading in terms of behavior. The side of the slide, the chat interaction group experience off the back of the traditional performative public social media space, or you have something that is heavily driven by video consumption. And even what used to be visual consumption, like images, has turned into video anyway. So platforms like Instagram obviously are a clear example of that transition. Um, as a result, one of the things that have changed is that the public side of social interaction has completely changed in terms of nature. So, whereas you used to have a public layer of social interaction that used to be about what you were up to, what you were thinking, and what is happening today is that that space is now being just exposed to a dark social space where a lot of social interactions are happening behind closed doors or in more private environments that are more niche and specific to specific groups of people. So the public side is still huge, but is more performative than it used to be. And obviously, TikTok has been the poster child for that kind of performative social environment. But most of the other platforms have kind of like followed suit in terms of behaviors, and that's interesting as an anthropologist and a social researcher. That doesn't mean that I discount that signal, because you can still gain a ton of insight on how people represent themselves. But obviously, what we clearly factor into any analysis today is that people are fully aware of, privacy issues, access to their data, and that changes the way they behave and they perform online, and so that changes the way you need to analyze the data to make assumptions about your audience. And obviously, scandals like Cambridge Analytica and the way Facebook managed access to their data during the 2016 elections have contributed massively to waking up audiences to the dangers and the use of that data, which has obviously changed the way they use these platforms. But this is where we're at today. And this is like one of the trends that we point out in the transitions in the space is the idea of the mediaification of social media. So social media has become a lot more like a media playground than what used to be called the social kind of like interaction playground. And so we gotta assume in the analysis that that's part of the context that we're looking at. If you look at the platforms that are growing the most, these are like some of the ones with like the biggest growth rates: with Blue Sky, Thread, Substack, Letterboxd, Truth Social. And these platforms are obviously mapping to different needs and different vibes from the audiences, and the idea of the cultural vibe is actually quite important, because platforms are becoming self-contained worlds that represent specific ways of belonging rather than just utilities. And so you start having specific platforms for specific types of people that only exist or mainly exist in those platforms. And that again changes the way we assess public opinion and audiences, because they move through these different platforms depending on their identity, not just depending anymore on their behaviors or their interest graph. And that's another important shift to bear in mind. The thing to bear in mind, though, is that there is a lot of conversations on how all of the challenges and the battleground of public opinion and data privacy control and audiences has had a negative impact on public engagement on social media, and that is true in many ways. But that doesn't necessarily mean that social media has died as a public sphere. It has changed as a public sphere, and it is used in many more different ways than it used to be used, like even just like 6 years ago, before the pandemic. But what is interesting is that the time spent on social media has kept growing. So even though in some cases the user base have been relatively flat, or the public content and the public interactions that you see have been um, not growing as fast, the time spent is one of the things that we look at, and the time spent has been growing aggressively. And so if you look at, for example, um, case in point, a platform like X, there is obviously all the problems that come with the ownership of X, and all the problems that come with the narratives around how the platform is focused on certain types of behaviors to amplify certain types of audiences and drive certain types of agenda. That is all obviously true and happening, and how that has driven away specific communities of people. For example, academia has begun deserting X pretty much like 3 years ago and migrated heavily to Blue Sky, which is something that we have seen clearly in the data. But even though that's happening, X still or Twitter still remains, I think, is like one of the top 6 or 7 websites in the world by visits. So when we look at analyzing this space, we still need to bear in mind that usage, public content being posted is one thing, but time spent on the platform and visits to the domains of those platforms is also a really strong indicator on how relevant those platforms are to public opinion and how they shape it still today. And then the other thing that we wanted to flag with this kind of analysis, when you look at user base growth versus time spent, is that you have a bunch of new platforms that did not used to be social that have become social. Stuff like Spotify and Netflix, for example. Again, if you have social becoming more media, you also have media becoming more social, and that is happening more and more. And watch parties and listening parties are a really good example of that on platforms like Spotify and Netflix. But then you also have platforms like Character AI, a new kind of platform that supports social interactions, but introduces a new, completely different spin when it comes to synthetic audiences. And you can expect also that all the companies that are now driving AI usage will introduce social layers of interactions on top of them, especially when it comes to search experiences. We haven't seen it yet, but we can expect that a platform like OpenAI and a platform like Anthropic will at some point introduce a social layer to that product as well. So we expect these analysis to be updated with data that covers that space as well. Um, I just wanted to share a quick summary of like the key trends that we see in this space, and I'm going to share this deck afterwards. But like I think there's like 5 drivers of this big bang, and I'm going to leave it at these, and then we can discuss the implications. But like the first one is that social is becoming more media led and driven um, a- as a kind of platform which is pushing people to seek authenticity in new spaces while also retraining users to consume social like they consume entertainment. Second element is that algorithmic personalization is splintering the way we experience the world within the same platform. And so what used to be common knowledge because something had gone viral doesn't mean anything anymore because the thing doesn't go viral in the same way for every single user on the platform. And so when you look at this within the same platform and you look at this across multiple platforms, the assumptions that we make about what is known in public opinion and what is not known are very questionable today, and there's very little visibility on what is and what isn't. The third one is that platforms features have been converging towards a very similar set, and so this is obviously connected to how audiences are jumping from one platform to the other, and therefore how these experiences need to be consolidated and standardized. But is also a driver of more consumption of platform hopping that is happening more and more, and therefore that drives very specific implications for how you market to audiences that expect to see evolutions of the same kind of idea or content across different platforms, which is why narratives, for example, have become the unit of marketing rather than a specific campaign or a specific content, because you want a narrative to be driving behaviors and perceptions across different bubbles that you're navigating with that specific narrative. Um, Number four, the need for users to feel like they have agency and they're regaining some kind of control is pushing them towards anti-algorithmic and decentralized spaces. Now, this is not necessarily a trend that you can expect to scale indefinitely, and this is more of a pushback to what we're seeing in terms of like algorithms driving the way people consume content and engage in social platforms. So this is creating a backlash that is pushing in the opposite direction. Whether that backlash is going to drive to sustainable growth into anti-algorithmic space is it's questionable at the scale that we need to be to consider that culturally relevant. But what is definitely true is that spaces are getting decentralized, and therefore that decentralization has a direct impact on the way we market and talk to audiences. And then finally, platforms are becoming identity based. And so you used to have platforms based on pretty much everything and everyone. Then platforms evolved into subsets based of interest and based on specific behaviors. Now that transition has moved into catering to specific identities, and stuff like Truth Social is exactly that. You identify with MAGA, you consume the world and your social interaction through Truth Social because that's what you identify with. I'm gonna stop at this, otherwise I'm gonna take up too much time. But I think there's some a range of implications that we can discuss off the back of these changes.
Uh, Thank you so much, Francesco. There's a huge amount to contemplate in there. It's a great starting off point, I think, and a great way to set the scene. SJ, can I ask you to take the floor now and give us a perspective from Cambridge?
Well, it is a very fragmented landscape out there. And we have, being a very small team, we can't be everywhere all at once. So we take a beat on what is going on and keep an eye on what's happening. Our general perspective has always been we go where our audiences are at. So we go where our students need us or will want to see things from us, and we do what we can within that. Um, is that what you mean by taking a perspective on that? Um, so I should clarify at this point that I haven't been working in social media for the last 5 months. And as we all know, social media moves pretty fast. And so there may be changes in the way that we look at things, but I think in the long term, that has always been our stance. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And which is where we meet people where they are. So that's where I'm at, and it's basically just keeping an eye on where our engagement is. I love that slide earlier on about showing number of people versus um, daily engagement. That is so telling. It's like everybody, yeah, the general accepted belief is that Facebook has the biggest audience. True, but fewer and fewer people are actually engaging on that platform, and we are seeing it. And it's a combination of the algorithm doing things and people just not engaging as much or staying as long on Facebook as they used to. So that was very interesting for me. It was very interesting also where you sort of shared things like character AI, which was something that my kid, who's now 15, was actually using themselves a couple of years, well, 3, 4 years ago. So they were there. And it was a bit of a worrying trend for me. I mean, I was just wondering, is this something that we need to consider as a way of, is this a channel we need to consider? And I think the answer was no, because it's very resource heavy in order for it to work in the way that we want it to work. And also, I think we are kind of at the mercy of the product owners, rather than we're doing it for ourselves. So yeah, so that's where we're at, I think. Of course, it feels like I'm just talking on my ass at this point. Sometimes the heat is just making my head go a bit funny. Alistair, any thoughts?
Hi, SJ. Yeah, I guess, kind of thinking about AI particularly, I think, so I've worked in the sector for about 12 years now, largely in social media roles, currently at the University of Manchester. And I think um, AI is both a risk and a tool, I feel. I think um, uh, ultimately, as organizations and maybe the sector, we need to be in perhaps a middle position between the panic that's going on and in some areas, and but the benefits and the opportunities as well. So um, I am really conscious that there's a big anti-AI push on the consumer side. So our students have a high detector for artificial things and essentially, sorry for sharing swearing, bullshit. So, um, I feel from a content perspective, um, well, from a marketing comms perspective, a winning strategy is using AI in the background, like the plumbing that you have, rather than kind of the introductory content that you have. Because I think that ultimately a lot of us are managing trust here. I think universities are, um, yeah, it's brand safety for us is about how people see us, how the public sees we see us. We know the media, the media interest in universities is mostly negative. Lots and lots of questions about universities. So building trust is a primary currency for universities, in my view. Um, and I think kind of the risk on a content level is not just appearing alongside unsuitable content. I mean, if that happens, it really undermines confidence in our expertise as researchers, our students, our civic role and service in the public. So, um, yeah, I think for me, kind of having been in the sector for this time, and reflecting on Emma's presentation earlier, I think a really valuable skill for social media managers is editorial restraint. I think earlier in my career, it was a bit of a kind of post it and run kind of activity, and you could often be successful through being active and fast and moving to things quickly. But I think there's a maturity now in knowing when not to post, when not to join a trend, and when perhaps a social platform is not the right place for that conversation.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think that we're definitely being a bit more cautious when we see trends happening. And more our audiences are expecting us not to do that. It's like, yeah, I think once we did jump on a trend, and then quite a few comments were, why is Cambridge doing this? And we thought it was just a bit of fun, but a lot of people were like, we don't expect you and we don't want you to do this sort of stuff. And some people were really for it, and some people were like, should you be really doing that? And that's interesting, is that when you put yourself out there in as a brand out there, obviously you're opening yourself up to the kind of criticisms that you think, well, if we were in person, you wouldn't say that to me. It's like you'd be thinking, what right do I have to do that? But in this space, it's like everybody, you're fair game, right? It's like, but yeah. And the whole sort of sometimes we've posted a video and it's you get a lot of comments saying, is that AI? Which is weird when you think about, no, we actually shot this just outside. I mean, can you not tell the difference anymore? That is really worrying. I think more and more is so hard to tell what the difference is anymore. And I think audiences are finding it really hard. There's a real fear that, AI will be talking to AI on social platforms, and you don't know who's real and what's not anymore.
I think that's also a good thing though, because like I see with my kids, I've got two kids, one is almost 6 and one is 9. And it's been at least like a year and a half that they've been asking very often when they see something, is that AI? And like it's good that they have that question in their head, because that means that when they are bombarded, because they don't use social media and they won't, hopefully for the next few years before they get that before they're allowed to have a phone and stuff. I think it's good anthropologic training for them to be questioned by default rather than assuming that the default is real. It will make them, it will skill them to be able to handle a very complex information environment that we're not born to trust, the way it is. But like even my generation, like I'm 47, so I've kind of like grew up half outside of the web and half on the web. Um, they didn't have the luxury.
Mm.
So the luxury is like everything is mediated, social interactions are mediated, everything you see goes through these layers of like AI generation. And now what we're seeing, for example, there's I've noticed this recently. Have you guys seen what happened to Ferrari when they announced the Ferrari Luce, the electric vehicle? So Ferrari did this partnership with Johnny Ive and the company that designs new kind of like physical products that are like AI enabled. Johnny Ive worked with Ferrari to design their new electric vehicles. And the electric vehicle that Ferrari designed, when it was announced last month, had a major negative backlash because of mainly because of the design. It just didn't look like a Ferrari. And so normally when you have this kind of thing, you have a massive spike of engagement, and then that engagement between 28 to 24 to 48 hours kind of drops, and you go back to the baseline. In this case, what happened was different. So there was the initial spike and initial backlash and initial discussion against the design and against Ferrari and what they got wrong and all the usual, pundits setting comments on whatever they think they're an expert on. But then a second wave started, and that second wave was prompted by AI generated content that was now creating memes on the failures of Ferrari. So traditionally, you would have people making some comments and then a couple of people really good with a few tools generating a couple of images that become the catalyst for all the negative engagement, and everybody piles on to those two images that are like created by the couple of people that can use the tools. But because now everyone can create tools and everyone can create outputs of good quality with AI, what happens is that you had a completely second wave, bigger than the first one in terms of engagement, on negativity piling onto the brand because there was this new influx of high quality visual assets that were generated by tons of people. And the dynamic is also interesting because traditionally you would have negative engagement concentrated across a few key assets that those few people that were able to generate them generated. So it was easier for you to control the negative wave. But now, because everybody can do that, engagement per asset is actually lower, but the wave is way more decentralized and distributed. And so you have many different points of entry for the same debate. And so the wave ended up being bigger than the initial 24 hours launch wave, which I thought was an interesting new dynamic. And so in that case, it was clear what was AI and what wasn't. But very often, especially when it comes to politics, for example, you don't have the luxury because people are making politicians say things that they never said. Or I just saw something the other day that was, oh yeah, so I saw yesterday a post on apparently Andy Burnham appointing a TikTok economics influencer as his advisor on strategy. This is the guy that is all about like tax the rich and that kind of narrative. And so everybody exploded about that idea, but it wasn't true. They just made this guy that is called Gary speak as if he was appointed, but he actually wasn't. So that's a classic case where I think my kids are going to be better equipped than I am to immediately discount that as AI until you prove that it's not.
Yeah, I mean that's quite a risk, isn't it, for established brands, and it obviously links back to Alistair's point about trust. Uh, I suppose I'm going to be interested to hear SJ's and Alistair's perspective on whether they are feel like they are in a sort of defensive crouch now, worried about these kind of things, or or whether we can flip that around to be a bit more positive and sort of, I was actually really struck, for example, with your first slide about how, the landscape has changed so much even in 5 years. And one of the things which surprised me actually was just how completely minute the circle of, for example, the Blue Sky was compared to some of the other platforms. Uh, and uh, and so I suppose, but yet we kind of know that there's been a bit of an exodus of certainly UK academics to Blue Sky. So I wondered whether Alistair and SJ could share their views on it. But I suppose where they're having, where's the success, if you like, where are they winning? in the splinternet. You know, find it. You said you were, for example, SJ, you said you were going to the platforms where people were. I'd be interested to know where you feel like actually, you know, where is the audience for UK universities? What platforms are they using? Because they're probably not on character AI.
But so at Cambridge, for us, we found Blue Sky very difficult to gain traction. I think it was very, very specific things. And also, it's still very splintered. But I think that the platforms that we are a bit more focused on are LinkedIn, which has experienced a huge amount of growth in recent years compared to X, especially after, you know, X became X, as it were. So LinkedIn is that. Instagram, we're seeing a lot of engagement on Instagram. That still remains one of our better engaging platforms for us. Threads also very difficult, and sometimes comes and goes. It really depends. And on TikTok, so TikTok we see to be a hit with younger audiences with the social media ban. So we're definitely a hit with younger audiences on TikTok. And then there's this crossover between TikTok and Instagram. And then on LinkedIn, it's much more mature audiences, people who are a lot more serious about the kind of content that they want to see. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. I think we don't, having sort of explored being on lots of different platforms all at once, I think that strategy doesn't work for us. So concentrating efforts on those key platforms.
Yeah, I think for us at Manchester, I think we're trying to look at things more from a content perspective rather than immediately thinking of the channels. So we're putting more emphasis and resources into developing those content ideas and stories essentially, and then looking at channels. Whereas a few years ago, it might be, oh, you know, we want to go onto TikTok or we want to go onto Instagram to do this. We definitely got better at kind of developing those content themes and perspectives. So I think, yeah, it's about editorial judgment, really, this role. It's really understanding your audiences, being really clear on what they're looking for, as much as you can. From a very specific research perspective, it's about PRing your stories. It's about PRing your content. So there's a colleague on the call, Ruby, who I'll just shout out, who has really led our research comms and research content forward. And the way she's done that is to look at topical things that are in the news that are being talked about. So examples are during the Traitors series, we sat down with some psychologists and we asked them, how do you lie and how do you win and be successful in this program? So we've spoken to a meteorologist this week about what's going on with the weather, and the result of that has been really interesting because journalists are really thirsty for content. That's video, that's audio, that's expert comment. So we've actually gained media coverage from a TikTok. And so I think that shows that there are lots of opportunities for teams to work together. So that's a content team working with the media team, working with a faculty office, and ultimately an academic to get those individuals noticed, and to place them into spaces that will kind of raise their profile and support the university's reputation as well. You may have seen Nature, the journal. They've made a big deal of going onto TikTok this week or a few weeks ago. Are they a bit late to the party? They probably are, but I think when you have a major player like Nature in that research space saying that ultimately written science comms is out and the video science comms is in, I think you have to take notice of that.
That's certainly an approach that we've taken at Cambridge for a long time, I guess, certainly as long as I've been doing social media. It's always been a multi-pronged approach. So we're slightly, we're set up a bit different from Manchester, in that we have a research comms team, we have a media team, we have a social media team. And so we work in tandem with them to sort of, and they have like years of experience between them, and they know from experience which stories are going to catch the imagination. So, and which academics are going to look at a camera. So you might have seen Sander van der Linden very recently. So he's been dubbed the professor of the dark arts. Basically, he's a misinformation and disinformation researcher. Has been working in this space for about 10 years or more now. And he was the key advisor to the government on how to pre-bunk a lot of misinformation. And he and his team, working with government and with social media platforms, developed a couple of games which were sort of rolled out just shortly after the pandemic or during the pandemic, something like that, which helped a lot of people spot fake news. So we first surfaced Sander on Facebook because at the time we had a really good engaged audience. So we're talking a few years now back then, and that sort of, and then again on YouTube, and then that got picked up by the press, and then so on and so forth. So that's kind of how we've been surfacing young and up and coming researchers as well as more established names. One of the things that we did for our younger audiences, particularly on TikTok, was we would share their pictures. So one of the things that we share a lot is the Falling Walls conference. I don't know whether you guys in this audience, you might know about the Falling Walls conference, where young up and coming early career researchers get to pitch their idea to peers to gain networks and funding, and the winners get a nice package of support kind of thing. So the UK round, which only started a few years ago, is now held at Cambridge. And so we get researchers from all over the country, and they come and they do their spiel. And we started sharing that 2, maybe 3 years ago on TikTok, the first time we shared it. So the social media video manager and myself were looking at this video and we're going, do you know what he's talking about? He was talking about AI at that time. So we both said, do you know what he's talking about? And we both went, not really. We just know that it sounds exciting, but it's about AI and computing and things. Do you think we should share it on TikTok? Do you think our audiences would get it? And we're like, give it a go. You know, they might know something and we don't. It went big. It went completely viral, and it surprised the hell out of us. And the second person we did that with, who was also talking about AI, this time in research and how he used it to research a potential treatment for Alzheimer's disease. So this is the magic thing. This is the sweet spot, right? You're talking about things that are really close to people's hearts, as well as something quite high, high intellectual capacity that you need. And I think that is the sweet spot to gaining content that really reaches people for us, for researchers, and certainly for this kind of research intensive universities. So the second time we did that went completely viral. We hit a couple of million within a week. And the kind of engagement we got was incredible. I mean, the kind of comments we got was like, I've already watched this twice. I watched it first and then I watched it again. And then I shared it with my friends. I mean, these were the comments that we were getting. So it's really hard to replicate that, but that's kind of good strategy to go for. But it's these things, right? It's that magic moments that's really hard to plan for. That's hard to, and that seems to be true over the last few years. Alistair, do you think, that is bearing out? It's always that sweet spot where you speak to somebody that's really important, as well as do the research and stuff as well. And that gets you. So how do you do that? You can't, it's not replicable all the time because it's so dependent on the people that's doing it.
Yeah, I think that's I think that also links back, I think, to the sort of authenticity and sort of relatableness that
Yes.
works really well in video, doesn't it? In the
Mm.
sense of, it's obviously that wasn't a fake, wasn't made by AI. It wasn't fake, but it was talking about that, as you say. It's the brand
Yeah.
sweet spot, isn't it, where you're talking about something, uh, the work of the university, but in a relatable human way. And I think, that's often we are looking for that sort of news hook at the conversation as well when we're commissioning pieces. I'm conscious of time now. We've only got 9 minutes before we have to pack up. We've got a couple of questions. If there are any more questions coming, you are going to have to ask them now. Uh, Lucia Graves, can I ask you to turn on your microphone and ask the question that you've put in there?
Um,
Video, if you're brave enough.
Hi. I think you actually all may have had a bit of a go at answering this already, but I just wanted to know if you had any forecasts, what you'd bet on, if you were going to focus on just 2 or 3 things in social. I think SJ, you kind of replied to that already, but perhaps there are other views.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I think I think a lot of good social media work is kind of in the background, not necessarily that visible. So things like, the importance of governance and listening to your audiences and kind of planning that content is going to be particularly useful, I think, and important. Um, I think as well, just in terms of kind of the channels and the ways that these things work, I think kind of like private and algorithmically shaped feeds are still gonna increase. I think there will be kind of AI involved in this. I think we've already touched on this. So AI is ultimately going to mediate some of this content in these channels. I still think that a lot of social will be kind of dark social. It won't necessarily be consumed or used publicly, if that makes sense. So the engagement might be in DMs rather than public share or something like that. So for example, if you look at the Instagram app and the way it's designed, the in the middle of the screen at the bottom is the DM or the inbox, because they know that so many users are kind of sharing and talking about social content or sharing content privately rather than, 5 or 6 years ago, you would usually share it publicly. So that's kind of a design choice by the company. And then finally, I think it'll be important really to measure this. Again, the best or the key metrics are not the ones that you can just screenshot. They're the things that have an impact on the university business, or if it's a researcher, kind of a collaboration or a conference or a media kind of appearance. So it's really thinking about the metrics behind all of this and why we're doing it.
Thanks for that,
If
Alistair.
I,
Francesca, I don't know if you want to very
yeah,
quickly pitch in on
just
that
want,
before we move on to another question.
yeah, a couple of points to add to that. So I wanted to, in terms of like the 3 bets, definitely focus on short form vertical video as the primary format. So TikTok, Reels, YouTube Shorts, that's what your audience is consuming, and that's where you can make the most impact. The other thing is like focusing on like authentic versions of your content, as in like, for example, the highest performing academic social right now is takeovers, or day in the life, dorm campus reality, that kind of like, and then you both the researchers kind of like access that you were talking about before, but people want that direct access, and that makes a huge difference in terms of engagement. And then the biggest one for me is that your unit of strategy and your unit of effectiveness is narrative. It's not content anymore. It's not channel. So when you're planning, the only way that works today is planning by narrative. So for example, you want to own the narrative that AI is good for a specific outcome, right? Let's say that's the narrative that you want to own as a university because you have a lot of like research in that specific field and you want to push that narrative as being one of the most relevant that shapes your brand. So planning by narrative allows you to plan one level above the channels and one level above and 2 or 3 levels above the content. And so that allows you to create a strategy that survives the fragmentation. And then that works really well if you also measure the outcomes in terms of narratives. For example, after we've done 50 pieces of content on this specific narrative across these different platforms and these different formats, how much more of a share of that narrative do we have as a brand? So think about narrative as the unit of strategy and the unit of measurement rather than content and channels specifically.
Excellent. I think we've only got time for one more question because we've got 4 minutes left, and we have two more questions left to answer. I'm going to ask Serena to ask her question now because she got in there first. I hope that's okay.
Well,
Sorry, Daisy.
just to be quick, you've kind of picked up on some of what I'd asked in the answers just now, but is there any further insights that you have around kind of getting your key stakeholders? And I'm thinking particularly academics, because we're trying to push for more collaboration in terms of using their channels, because we've got, you know, some of our academics have got really their own audiences, and we know that where academics will push out content to their audiences, it can really make a big difference. So I didn't know if you have any particular insights on strategies to work even more closely with stakeholders on collaborations and amplification.
I'm seeing a resounding silence from the panel. SJ, you able to jump in there?
Oh, that's well, what's worked for us a lot is spotting those academics who already have active social media presence. Sander, for example, used to post a lot on LinkedIn and on Facebook and Instagram. Well, actually, he didn't. It was later on that he started to do a lot more of that. Identifying those academics who are quite comfortable with it. Another thing that we've been trying is actually having academics talk to each other. So a couple of years ago, one of our PhDs who recently graduated, you might have heard the story. So she posted about her success on Twitter, and basically lots of misogynistic comments, a lot of, she had a huge tsunami of negativity, but then after a while, it sort of became quite positive. So she, from that quite kind of innocuous post, suddenly became a poster child for women working in academia. So she grew in confidence in that space and was posting more and more. And we thought, you know what? Why don't we talk to her about interviewing another academic for us on our channels as well as on hers? And that strategy seems to be working. I think you can see a recent one, which I'll post in a chat, where she speaks to a Russian academic who actually had a little bit of negative feedback from the kind of research that she was doing. But overall, I think the collaboration was quite positive. The other thing also is using social media tools. So we find a lot of success with collabs on Instagram. Not a research thing, but certainly when we were boat race, I know that's unique to Oxford and Cambridge, but collabs for the boat race is incredibly valuable for us. So using that collaboration tool, it has been really helpful. Certainly one of the smaller channels, research-based channels, actually took off because they're doing collabs with other academics who are working in that space. So yeah, collabs will be a good thing for me.
Okay, that's exactly 12 o'clock. I'm sure you all want to get to have some lunch, or at least a little bit of a break from hearing people talk. SJ, Francesco, Alistair, you've all been amazing. Loads of really great insights there. I think we could probably just chat all afternoon. There is actually an opportunity to chat later in the afternoon. So if you have more questions or issues that you would like to take on, please do dig out the link for the Canva whiteboard, which is right at the beginning of the meeting chat. And add an idea for a workshop later on in the afternoon for the unconference. And we can really get into the details later on in the afternoon when we've all had some more coffee. So again, thank you very much for everybody for giving up your time. Thank you for taking part, and hopefully we can continue the conversation later on.